is Pretty from It's a Pretty World. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm using this Mighty Hands card stamp set called Call to Create to make 5 cards using that one stamp set. So I'm starting off with this white panel that I am going to draw a square on. So you can easily use a ruler and a pencil to draw the square, but it was easier for me to just trace the outline of the die to just create that square shape for my card. And once I was done with drawing the shape, it was time for me to mask the sides of the shape. And the reason I was doing that is because I wanted to concentrate all the stamping right in the center of that square. So I already pre-selected all the tiny stamps from the stamp set to stamp in the center of the square, and I used Versafine ink because I was planning to use Zig color markers. Now the paper that I'm using is Bristol Smooth, and it's a really beautiful paper to use when you're using Zig color markers. You could also use watercolor paper. I find Bristol really a very nice and easy paper for these markers especially. And then I just did all the palettes in a very light gray shade, and then I added the colors in the center of the palette, or not the center, on the palette, and I used more like the reds and yellows and green, blue, and purple, more like a rainbow, or in a rainbow order on top of the palette. And I did them all one by one. So basically I colored all the palettes first, then I colored all the colors, then I colored the brush, and then the pencils. The pencils I colored just like a normal yellow pencil with a pink eraser, and the brush I colored with a brown handle. And then I made sure to add a little bit of color on the tips of the brushes, as if those paint brushes have been dipped into color palettes. The stamp set also has the little where it says makers and create, and it has a hashtag. And I added that as well, and some musical notes all over the place just to fill in those smaller spaces. And once I was done, it was time to remove the washi tape. And while I was removing, I tore my paper, and I was so frustrated, but I wasn't ready to throw this because I had put a lot of work coloring that. So then I decided to trim that panel down and completely change my route right here. So I trimmed the panel down and made it into a smaller square, and then I decided to adhere that onto craft cardstock. And then I also embossed a sentiment on white with white embossing powder onto a black cardstock, and the sentiment read, "Blessed be the work of your hands." And I just adhered that and the edge on the left edge of the square panel. And to make sure that it stays put, I added a washi tape between that so it holds it a little better. And then I popped this entire panel onto the craft cardstock. But before I did that, obviously I needed to add some bling, so I took some pretty pink Posh white gemstones and I added that, and here's the completed look of that card. For the second card, I went with okay, this is an initial plan, but then I eventually quickly changed my plan. I cut a die, a hard die, using that designer paper, and then I took a top folding white note card, and I used the smaller heart shape die. This actually is a nesting die from Simon Says Stamp. And then what I did was I took the smaller die, and I cut just the top panel of the folded cardstock, and that's how it's going to be. And that's going to be a open window. And then I stamped this bulb stamp from the same stamp set using Versafine ink, and after I stamped it, I clear embossed it with some clear embossing powder just to give it a little bit of shine. And then I colored it using the Zig color. So I just used 2 basic colors, a darker yellow and a lighter shade of yellow, keeping the darker shade in the center and the lighter shade towards the edges of the bulb, making it look like it's a glass. And then also for the base of the of the bulb, I used two gray shades, one darker one and one in the light shade, and then I just took the blender pen and just blended it in between just to give it a little shine. And then I fussy cut this bulb very close to the black line, leaving a very, very small border of white showing. Once I had done fussy cutting it, I also embossed another sentiment, which is called For the Kingdom, onto a black cardstock using white embossing powder. And so the sentiment would read, inspired by the Holy Spirit for the kingdom. All the Mighty Hand is a Christian company, so their stamps are all faith-based. They're beautiful, beautiful stamps. And you can really use them for Bible journaling. If you're in Bible journaling, you can use them for card making. You could use them for scrapbooking. Really, there's so many things that you use them for. Really beautiful, beautiful stamps too. Very whimsical but beautiful stamps. And then I adhered this heart shape in the inside of the cardstock, and then note card, and then I also adhered the bulb onto the black cardstock sentiment strip, and I cut a fishtail banner at the on one end of that black, and then I adhered them all onto it with the foam tape. Now make sure that you're adding the foam only the bottom of that sentiment panel, the black panel, and not all over, otherwise the foam will be seen on the back side of your stamp when you open it. And then I added some gemstone, and there you go when you open, and that was it. Here's the look of the second card. Now for the third stamp, I took the stencil, and the stencil is called Dot Stencil from Altenew. You don't have to have the stencil for what I'm doing. You can easily use just a blending brush or blending sponge and just blend the blue color. I had the stencil, so I decided to just add a little bit of texture in the center. So I took this peacock feather Bristol Oxide ink and my blending brush, and then I very lightly blended, fading it off to the edge right in the center. And then I stamped this big sentiment which read, "He calls gifted artisans by name," and then there is a blank underneath the name, which I plan to add my daughter's name later, which is Nivi. You'll see in the finished card. And then I also added a pre-colored palette and a brush to the corner. It's a very, very simple card, and I adhered some gems to it, and then I was done with this card. I added my daughter's name, Nivi. She is a creator at heart. She's always creating, she's always making stuff, she's always sharing her beautiful creation with people around her, but she just loves it, and I know that's a gift that God has given in her, and she is not shy of using it. And so here you go, this is the finished card. And now for the fourth card, I went with another white panel, and this time I took I think it's called Festive Berries Distress Oxide ink, and I decided to blend darker to lighter blending. Now this blending is not really very smooth. It wasn't really needed to be smooth because of what I was going to do on it. So you can see I went from dark to a lighter edge, and then I took the sentiment, another stencil from Simon Says Stamp. I think it's called Falling Hearts. It's an older stencil, and I went heavy this time with the same color all over it. So you can see that hearts, very soft hearts all over the panel. And then I had also colored some more of those colored palettes. Just they are colored the same way, except that the base, instead of gray, it's red, because I wanted it to look like heart. So the sentiment read, "Your art is full of heart." It's so beautiful. Your art is full of heart, and it's so true. You know, if your art is done with your heart, there's so much of love in it. There's so much of love. So that was this is just a beautiful, beautiful sentiment. So I just wanted to make this entire card filled with hearts. And then I took a white gel pen, and I just added some dots just to show some stardust all over the hearts. And then I wanted to cut down this panel a bit, so I just took an eighth of it from each side and then adhered it to a white cardstock, and that's the finished card. For the last and final card, I took this Tim Holtz stencil. This is again a very old stencil. I don't really remember the name, but I'll put it in the description box below. There is Distress Rays, and then I just wanted to add some rays right behind that bulb that you saw, and I took I think it's called Wild Honey Distress Oxide ink, and I very lightly inked up just that little part. And then I also inked up, after I removed the stencil, I also inked up a little bit more of yellow, whatever was left over in the brush, on top of that stenciled place. And then I cleaned up a stencil for the next step, because it was important that I don't contaminate my ink pad, because I then put the stencil back from where it was, and I took my embossing ink and I just flicked it over that stencil, and I took this beautiful embossing powder. It's called pearlized embossing powder from Hero Arts. All it does is it just adds a little bit of pearly shine to your embossed image, and it just gave some beautiful shine. You can see that when I shook it in the light. And then I took some gold ink, watercolor paint from Gansai Tambi, and I just flicked that all over the panel. Now it was time to stamp this bulb again, and this time I wanted this bulb to be stamped with gold embossing powder. So I prepared my white cardstock, and I did the same thing, but instead of coloring with pens, I just colored it very lightly with the same yellow Distress Oxide ink, Wild Honey, keeping dark in the center and light towards the edges. I did not stamp the base of the base of this of the bulb though. And then I stamped the verse. It's not really a sentiment, it's a large verse. It says, Moses called Bezalel and Aholiab, and every gifted artisan whose heart the Lord had put wisdom, everyone whose heart was stirred to come and do the work. And once I was done, I adhered that bulb onto an action wobble, and then I took this shimmery yellow cardstock and I popped this entire panel onto the shimmery yellow cardstock, and that was the end. And you can see how beautiful that little wobble is, really cute. And yeah, I couldn't stop playing with that. And then that finished, and here's a look at all the 5 cards that I created. I hope you liked it. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.